there? Right there. Oh, here. Okay. Well, yeah, we did our first one. We're actually playing great, and then it was going to show up. And then we had like, I was wish no one would show up. Yeah. It'd be so nice. Like, it's fun. Have we met before? Nice. Well, yeah. It's being on my first. I'm about you first. Happy for I'm gonna sleep. That's my videos. So read this out, right? Okay. One for it. All right. Just be the same. Just around. Well, you should teach me the wrong word. So let's get started now. As you come here, you have to read. Yeah. You want me to read the statements? Yeah, that's fine. So. Yeah, this is statements, and then I'll pass it back to you for the following part. I say, yeah, I'll read the forward-looking statements. This is your script. Okay, let's read. All right, and then transfer back to here. Then, okay, right? That being said, it's my pleasure to know. That was the part. So far. Yeah, circle left. And I love to go see them. Done a lot. Yeah. That's great. That's good. Yes? Not yet. Yeah. Reseal your seats. These two, and then come here. Thank you. I get the tell, but like, it's like the words are
Yeah, exactly. I know. No.
Age too much. Great. Well, guys, thank you so much for coming. This is our annual general meeting. And I just wanted to do a show of hands. Here is a local. Oh, lots of local stuff there. Here, travel, and your head up. That's right. You can travel us with 3 hours. Amazing. Thank you. 6 hours. 10 hours. 15 hours. Okay. People that was at 10 hours. Gerard, I know you. Hey, what's your story? Why would you say well, thank you so much for coming, guys. Well, it's not a pressure. It's kind of okay. So yeah, like I said, 2025. That is our 3rd year of being public. It's actually our 19th year in business. So kind of a crazy milestone. And whatever we do this AGM, lots of investors, friends in town. And yesterday, Chris and I hosted a lunch at a little time restaurant called Xander's here in town. And Chris reminded me of that. He said, pointed to the tables And so that's the table where I started. And I remember Chris and I at the time had just in 2014 or something.
Yeah.
2014, we sold a business and we had sold it for $70 million. And we have all these disastrous companies. We started about 10 businesses, 2 of them worked. And we were left with this feeling of frustration because we've been building all these companies and we've experienced so much failure. And when we read about Warren Buffett, we realized that we were really doing it hard. And I remember like, we skip the line, we just go and buy wonderful businesses, only long term, and make it a little bit better. And so we both decided how much money we're going to put in. And we got started. In 2015, we had our first acquisition. And so that was over 10 years ago. So really, we've had this chaotic entrepreneurial startup journey for 9 of those years. The last 10 years has been buying businesses. And we just had a team just to kind of market this milestone. We had the team do a bunch of work to figure out how fast we could grow. Actually, grown at 37% compound annual growth rate for revenue, and our earnings have been 25% alongside that. So it's been a really wild journey. And at the time, our total revenue was less than $10 million. So here, 19 years in to be in the scale we're at, it just feels totally crazy. And none of this would be possible without all the incredible people we have around us. So I just want to take a moment and introduce everybody. So our incoming CEO, Bruce Todd. Easy to stand up and you're the time you're out of this. Stand up. This is your moment to shine. You're all only going to speech when he's lost his place, so and I want to say a big thank you to Shannon Parrish. Shannon was one of our first outside shareholders. Chris and I actually never took any outside capital. And in 2019, we sold the business, we went to buy it back. We did our first deal, and we led a partner. And that partner was Shane. So Shane has been walking alongside us for 6 or 7 years now. He's an incredible partner. And he's just finishing his tour of duty on the board. But I know he's watching on the live stream, so let's give him a round. And it looks like there's such broader air classes over there. Any other blue one? Everyone thanks for that. I also almost got me a big class here. So and also there's some really special people here for down in the state. When I was first starting out, I was just a guy who was making websites for local businesses. I had no idea what I was doing. And my primary strategy when I started was I would just meet random people and offer them jobs. And so that was how I met Chris, the guy who worked in banks, and we ended up and said, hey, I'm a CFO. And I haven't had that happen there for the summer. And the first person I hired was somewhere. But here's employee number 2, and here's employee number 2. Not many basis writer. He was my girlfriend at the time. He's friend, boyfriend. So and then my college roommate, Mark Nichols, is also here. And
Mark basically took over MetaLab. Mark is responsible for much of the growth in MetaLab. I was a terrible CEO, and Mark stepped in for a time from 2009 to 2015 or something like that. Mark is also a shareholder. Ali Bosworth is here, who's play number 4, 3, something like that. Yeah, also a shareholder. As well as King, who was with us along the way for the whole thing. Any other early OG people? I mean, Ben Moore is here. So Ben wrote me an email in 2010, I think, and he said, look, I don't know anything about tech, but I'm a writer. He wrote me this amazing email, and he said, I just want to work with you. And now Ben ended up rising through the ranks. He ended up running one of our businesses. Ended up taking it public with us, and then now he runs my family office. So huge thank you to Ben. Okay, all the content is done. Sorry about all the content. And then, sorry guys, one more cloud. This one's going to be a big cloud. So none of this would have happened. Like basically, Chris and I get the joy of just walking into this, and it's all organized. And there's pickleball paddles, and there's socks, and there's AeroPresses, and everything's amazing. And that's all because of Karen and Claire, our amazing huge thank you to you, Karen. So here's how this is going to go today. We have all the usual legal formal side of it. So we're going to read off a very boring script, and we're going to do some motions and stuff like that. That should take, what, five minutes or so, something like that. We'll get through as quickly as we can. And then Jordan is going to walk you guys through what happened over the last year in business. And then we're going to get open to Q&A. You guys can ask us about anything you want. You can grill us like grilled cheese. No topics off limits. So yeah, why don't we get started? Mike, want to take it away?
Sounds good. Thank you, Andrew.
Oh, you're late.
Yeah. So before Andrew calls the meeting to order, I would like to state and read the forward-looking statements for today. Remember that comments made during this meeting of shareholders and the management presentation and question period may contain forward-looking information within the meaning of applicable securities legislation, which reflects the company's current expectations regarding future events. Forward-looking information is based on a number of assumptions and is subject to a number of risks and uncertainties, many of which are beyond the company's control. They could cause actual results and events to differ materially from those that are disclosed or implied by such forward-looking information. These forward-looking statements are made as of today's date, except as expressly required by applicable law. The company assumes no obligation to publicly update or revise any forward-looking statement, whether as a result of new information, future events, or otherwise. Please refer to the company's filings on SEDAR+, including our annual information form, the year ending December 31st, 2024, which identifies certain factors that could cause actual results to differ materially from those projected in any forward-looking statements made during the meeting.
Okay, isn't that fun? With that being said, it's my pleasure to now call the meeting to order. I'm going to ask Mike McKenna to act as secretary of the meeting and Irene Lee of the Computershare Trust Company to act as the scrutineer of the meeting. Scrutineer is a good word. The purposes of this meeting are to receive the audited financial statements of the company for the fiscal year ending December 31st, 2024, together with the auditor's report thereon, to fix the number of directors of the company at 5, to elect the directors of the company for the ensuing year, to appoint the auditor of the company for the ensuing year, and to authorize the board to set the auditor's remuneration, to consider and, if deemed advisable, pass an ordinary resolution of the shareholders approving certain amendments to the company's 10% rolling omnibus equity incentive plan, to consider and, if deemed advisable, pass an ordinary resolution reapproving the 10% rolling omnibus plan of the company, and to consider, if deemed advisable, pass a special resolution authorizing the company to complete a consolidation of all the issued and outstanding shares of the company on the basis of one post-consolidation share for up to every 5 pre-consolidation shares or such other ratio to be determined by the board. The specific details of the matters to be put before the meeting are set forth in the company's management information circular. The secretary has provided me with proof that the notice and access notification in the form of proxy were mailed to tiny shareholders on May 1st, 2025. I direct the affidavit of mailing will be annexed to the minutes of the meeting. I will dispense with the reading of the notice of the meeting. Before proceeding with the business of the meeting, I would like to take a moment to discuss the voting procedures. Each holder of a common share is entitled to one vote for each common share held. I propose that all votes for matters before today's meeting be conducted by a show of hands. The bylaws of the company provide that a quorum at a meeting of shareholders shall be one or more voting persons present and authorized to cast in the aggregate not less than 10% of the total voting shares. Votes attached to all shares carrying the right to vote at that meeting. I have received the scrutineer's report showing that there are in attendance at this meeting persons or by proxy 37 shareholders holding 155,096,615 common shares. Accordingly, the total representation at this meeting by shareholders present in person or by proxy is 82.7% of the common shares of the company. I would ask that the secretary file a copy of the scrutineer's report with the minutes of today's meeting. Therefore, I declare that there is a quorum present at this meeting. With the appropriate notice of the meeting having been given and a quorum being present, I declare the meeting duly constituted and ready for the transaction of business. Certain persons have been asked in advance of the meeting to make certain motions. This is in no way intended to discourage any discussion, comments, or questions from the floor. Should any shareholder or proxy holder wish to speak on any matter, please do so. I would ask that shareholders or proxy holders identify themselves by stating their name so that they may be recognized by the chair prior to speaking. I welcome all guests, but would ask that any non-shareholders or non-proxy holders refrain from voting. The first item of business is to receive the audited consolidated financial statements of the company for the year ended December 31st, 2024, and the auditor's report thereon, and the management's discussion and analysis, both of which are available for review on SEDAR+ on the company's website. I declare that the audited consolidated financial statements of the company for the year ended December 31st, 2024, and the auditor's report thereon, and the management's discussion and analysis have been received. The next item of business is to fix the number of directors the company to be elected. Directors of the company to be elected at this meeting for the ensuing year. The company is proposing the size of the board of directors to be set at 5. Do I have a motion to fix the number of directors of the company at 5? All those in favor signify in the usual manner by raising their hand. Any opposed? No? Okay, the motion is carried. We'll now proceed with the election of directors. The nominees standing for election as directors are Andrew Wilkinson, Chris Farley, Alex Conconi, Tim McElvain, and Carly Hudson. They've all consented to stand for election, and I would appreciate a motion to elect those nominated as directors of the company to hold office until the close of the next annual meeting or until their successors are duly elected. Perfect. All those in favor signify in the usual manner by raising their hands. All those opposed? No. Okay, the motion is carried. I now declare Andrew Wilkinson, Chris Farley, Alex Conconi, Tim McElvain, and Carla Matheson to be duly elected directors of the company to hold office until the next annual election of directors unless their office is vacated or a successor is appointed in accordance with the bylaws of the company. The next item of business is the appointment of KPMG Chartered Professional Accountants as auditors to hold office until the next annual meeting of shareholders at a remuneration to be fixed by the board of directors. I will now ask for someone to move and someone to second the motion in this regard. All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Any opposed? No. Okay. The motion is carried. The next item of business is the approval of certain amendments to the company's 10% rolling omnibus equity incentive plan. The amendments are set out in Schedule A of the Management Information Circular. I will now ask for someone to move and someone to second a motion in this regard. All those in favor signify by raising their hands. Opposed? The motion is carried. The next item of business is an ordinary resolution to reapprove the 10% rolling omnibus equity incentive plan of the company. The full text of the omnibus equity incentive plan is set out in Schedule B of the Management Information Circular. I will now ask for someone to move and someone to second a motion in this regard. All those in favor? Opposed? The motion is carried. Home stretch, guys. The next item of business is a special resolution authorizing the company to complete the consolidation of all the issued and outstanding shares of the company on a basis of 1 post-consolidation shares for up to every 5 pre-consolidation shares, for such other ratio to be determined by the board. I will now ask for someone to move and someone to second the motion in this regard. All right, all those in favor? Opposed? All right, the motion is carried. If there's no further business to be brought before the meeting, I would ask for a motion to terminate the meeting. All those in favor? Any opposed? All right, motion is carried. I declare the formal part of the meeting concluded, and I will now open the floor to any questions you may have. We will now move on to our business presentation. If you guys would prefer, we can do that all over again. What do you think? Should we, no? Do you want to do the presentation? Okay, great. I'll pass the mic over to Jordan.
Thank you. Appreciate it. First up, I wanted to say thank you for everyone for attending, our employees, our board, our investors, our partners. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to come and support us. We're lucky to have partners like you. I want to say specifically thank you to our employees who helped put this together, who helped, shape this year. I'm going to talk about all of the wonderful things that we've done this year. And I made some promises last year that I was going to give you updates on 4 specific things, and I'm excited to tell you about that. So thank you. So what I said last year, I made you guys a promise. I put up 4 things, or I said 4 things to you, and I want to be held accountable, and I want our team to be held accountable. And they were really 4 simple things. I promised that we were going to try to increase cash flow. That was through a combination of both organic growth and through cost discipline. I promised that we were going to look at, making acquisitions in a disciplined way. We're going to evaluate both tuck-ins. We're going to look at platforms. And we're going to focus on high-quality businesses with a recurring revenue base. I said we were going to manage and reduce leverage, and actually to make it even simpler, I said I'm going to tell you how much debt we paid down next year. So I'm going to talk about that a bit. And finally, I wanted to increase, upgrade our disclosure, be more transparent, all the service, and keeping ourselves tiny, accountable to you guys, our shareholders and partners. So I'm excited to tell you about this stuff. I have an update on each of these, and I'm also excited to hear about your questions and talk to you after the meeting. Increasing cash flow. I think the charts really speak for themselves, but I'm going to talk about some of the highlights that we've made. When I stepped in, we really thought long and hard about our operating structure. We had a hard look at costs. We had a hard look at management. And we really simplified our operating structure, we simplified our reporting, we found ways to make efficiency in our company. That resulted in $4 million of annualized cost savings. We also believe there's still more work to do. I'd also say that this wasn't in the service of eliminating, operational costs or development or things that are helping us grow. They were really in the service of creating more accountability, putting the right people in place, and operating our business in an intelligent way. We have not stopped investing in organic growth. Things like, investing in a services marketplace in Dribble, or, launching Walter recruitment service within We Work Remotely. These are all things that we think are going to benefit timing long term, and they're starting to really show up in results in Q1 and Q4 of 2024. We are on a more regular cadence of distributions from our tiny fund. As a reminder, this does not show up in our adjusted EBITDA figures. We had 2.2 million of distributions in 24, and we had 1 million of distributions in Q1 2025. And finally, we weren't afraid to, divest in certain small, non-wholly owned subs. It reflects our focus on our core assets. We really want to pay attention to stuff that moves the needle. And I really want to bring it together by saying I'm proud of the results of what we've done. It's showing up in Q4, it's showing up in Q1. Our adjusted EBITDA margin is now pushing north of 20%. We have a target to get that closer to 25% in the short and medium term. And we're going to keep showing the results quarter after quarter, and I'm excited for this year. We talked about acquisitions last year. We made 3 acquisitions in 2024. 2 of them focused on recurring revenue. Repeat is going to play a big part of our organic growth. Can you hear me? Repeat, a business involved with e-commerce, is going to play a big part of our organic growth story going forward in our e-commerce platform. MediaNet is a 100% recurring revenue business. EMS software business located in Arizona. Wholesale Pet, we bought in the fund. Again, speaks to our expertise in marketplaces, and we're investing in upgrading that platform. And finally, Serato, which we'll talk about a lot more, really represents a transformational acquisition for us, and we'll highlight some of the things why we're excited. But I mean, again, this kind of growth in recurring revenue, or our focus on this, it's really evident in our pro forma. We're looking at almost doubling our recurring revenue in 2025, and it is going to show up this year. Serato, we're excited. This is a special business. It's something that doesn't come along every day. I think the best way to put it is, if you ask people about Microsoft Teams, their eyes don't light up. It's not like the most exciting piece of software in the world. But when I talk to people about Serato and people that use it, they are evangelists. They are excited about this software. This is the stuff they use to have fun, make a living. They're obsessed with it. So, from a brand standpoint, an innovation standpoint, the hardware moats, their history of technology and culture and shaping this industry, that's what makes this special. You layer that on top of a really strong financial profile, meaning 10% compounded annual growth rate of revenue in the last 10 years, 62% recurring revenue, highly profitable, highly cash flowing business. This is what makes this an ideal acquisition for us. This is something we've been working on for 6 months. I'm heading to New Zealand on Saturday, spend a week with the team, and kick off this amazing opportunity. So this is great. I'm pumped about it. We said we were going to pay down debt. We did. We reduced our leverage from 3.8 times in Q4 23 to below 3 in Q1 25. We paid down almost $40 million of our gross debt throughout 2024, and we're continuing to reduce our leverage through 2025. There is going to be a slight uptick in our leverage, which we use to complete Serato. I think that it goes without saying, this is a responsible use of leverage. It's a special acquisition. It was done at a fair price. But it doesn't change our target, our priority of reducing that leverage to between 2 and 2.5, and actually in the long term below that. I'll also speak to the fact that reducing our leverage really gives us that flexibility to pursue acquisitions like Serato. Like, the only reason we were able to do that is because we paid down our debt. It gave us that flexibility, and we believe that that's the right thing for us to do. And finally, holding ourselves accountable, being transparent, talking to our investors, giving you more information. You know, we started our quarterly conference calls. We enhanced our investor materials and our disclosure. You know, that means providing case studies on our investments, showing you the results of our kind of, you know, sharing of best practices, or showing that we have a certain return on invested capital. We started disclosing fund performance, revenue related to the fund, distributions related to the fund. We're going to try and keep telling you more about our fund and operational highlights. And finally, we're really focused on giving you the key metrics to hold us accountable and you know, pointing out to you guys what makes us successful. So what do I want you guys to ask me about this year? A lot of the same stuff. We're going to keep doing it. We're going to keep doing a lot of the same things, but you know, there is a bit of nuance to this. Like, obviously, we're evolving. We've done a lot of work in 2024, but we still have more work to do. So we're focused on profitable growth and acquisitions. That means keep investing in organic growth. It means staying disciplined on cost. We still have more room to go there. Like, there's vendor consolidation opportunity. There's opportunity to save on taxes. I want you to ask me how Serato went. Like, I want to put up a case study and say, hey, this is how the first year went. This was our return on invested capital. Hold us accountable. We're going to continue optimizing our capital structure. That means reducing leverage. It means paying down debt. It means increasing profitability. It means looking at creative ways to make that more efficient. That gives us flexibility to make big acquisitions and do things like Serato. Finally, we have a big focus on aligning management, our culture. We're working on rolling out a new long-term incentive plan. We're sharing best practices. We're creating a culture of learning. We're having our first leadership offsite in Toronto. We got 50 people getting together, sharing what they know, making connections. And then finally, we're going to keep being transparent with you. We want to be held accountable, and we're going to keep upgrading our disclosure and reporting and telling this great story. So, thank you guys. We appreciate your support.
All right, with that, should we open it up to Q&A? Right, so guys, there's 2 mics. So if you line up to the mics and just go one by one, you want to start?
I started with you.
Go.
So yeah, for all the stragglers and the locals as well, we're going to be meeting at Swan's Pub for some beers and some drinks at about 1:30. It's a 10-minute walk, so free to go. Jordan, thanks for answering my question earlier. I do have one question. Bitcoin. Has there been any conversations about just adding a little bit of Bitcoin to the reserves?
No, that's not something we really thought about. And I think we find cryptocurrency really interesting. And as somebody who doesn't like dealing with bureaucracy, I love the idea of being able to say, hey, can I buy your house? And you say yes, and then we just have a smart contract do it all, and it's automated. But we're not commodities traders. We don't invest in currencies, so that's not something we really think about.
Can I convince you?
Maybe, let's talk.
I am Glasgow. First of all, I have great news that you're not going to invest in crypto like
That's all in Dogecoin. You guys notice that?
Good news.
That's right. Secondly, very hard to follow the Swans beer guy. But I'll try. So Jordan, great presentation, well done. I just want to hear about Tiny Capital's philosophy as far as post-investment integration to the portfolio. What is your playbook? How do you apply it? And how do you differentiate from someone like this equity partners?
I can take that. So I think the biggest, I remember I was talking to this guy, he'd sold his business. He had ran an agency business, kind of like Metal back. This is probably 10 or 15 years ago. And he said, I sold to WPP. You guys know what WPP is? It's like this huge advertising conglomerate. And he said, you know, they were fine to deal with. I was happy with the deal. It was life-changing money. I stayed on to run the business. But the reason I left was because they made me use Workday and they changed the day that everyone got paid. And when I wanted an office chair, they had to order it through their procurement system and stuff. And so I think our strategy has really been that when someone sells us their business, it's a very emotional decision. They're giving one of their children to a surrogate parent, and they really want to know that that parent is going to treat them well. And so one of our key things is just nothing changes. So the deal closes, and usually all the employees are panicked and they're worried that, you know, someone's going to be in the office changing everything or whatever. We just try and leave everything the same as much as possible.
So as a follow-on to that, in the event that you're buying out, let's say, a family-controlled business that really wants to retire, take the check, that out, makes sense. You need a management team. So what are you gonna do?
Well, there's two scenarios. So typically, there's situations, one example, we had a guy come to us, he was this awesome guy named Rich Crow, and he ran a field planning app up islands nearby. And he emailed us one day, he said, look, I've got these two co-founders, they own 70% of the business, I own 30%. They want to leave, they want to go start a new business. I want you guys to buy the 70%, and then I don't want to talk to you. And so we bought the business, we bought the 70%, and 6 months ago or so, we would have coffee with Mitch, and I started saying, you know, Mitch, you don't do any online advertising. If you thought about that, and just say, no, just leave me alone. And so Chris and I actually didn't talk to him for years. We texted him, we made sure everything was looking good, but we really left him to run his own business. And we ended up selling the business. I think we bought into it for $1 million, and we sold the business to Albertsons for $30+ million. So those are the dream scenarios where the founder wants to keep running the business and it's complex. If the founder wants to leave, then it's like brain surgery. And you're really doing an organ transplant, and you better make sure the DNA matches. And so that's always a challenge for us. But I think over the last 10 years, we've gotten very good at finding people who resonate with the culture of the business, resonate with the founder, and then aligning the incentives so that we all, both the employees and Tiny, benefit from the relationship.
Sir,
Maybe final question.
sir, so just to address the Vista point. So one of the differentiators of Vista is that they integrate the back-end software, they try to propagate it across, find synergies and economies of scale. So how does Tiny dig into the software component of this business?
So I remember I'm lucky enough to get to know Glenn Clark, who ran Jim Pattison Group for a long time. All you locals probably know who Jimmy Pattison is, but he's kind of like the Warren Buffett of Canada. He owns everything. So every car you see outside, you're going to see a Pattison sign. Any advertisement, you'll see Pattison on it. And I remember asking him that question, and he said, look, even our businesses that advertise, we don't even make them use our radio stations or our sign businesses. If they want to, they can, but we don't do that because when we get involved and we start telling CEOs how to run businesses, we get into trouble. And it's that same problem as the WPP situation. A CEO is an elephant, and we are the rider of the elephant. The elephant's going to go where it wants to go. We just don't want to get in their way.
Excellent, thank you.
Hi. Thanks everyone for making this, coming from Mexico City, 6-hour flight. So my question is about your philosophy in terms of generating outsized returns. In the public markets, you have like all those factors, very direct psychological factors that create inefficiencies. How do you see those inefficiencies in the private markets in terms of, like if they're more rational factors, like how do you consistently get deals like Serrano, things like that, so you can generate outside returns for the long term?
I think a big mistake that a lot of people in finance make is they go, why wouldn't the founder just hire an investment banker to run a process? And the reality is most founders, myself included, when I owned a bunch of valuable businesses, I thought an investment banker was the guy who gave me money behind the counter at the bank. I didn't know what that was. And so most founders that own great businesses,
they're not even really thinking about selling their business necessarily, or if they are, it's in the back of their head somewhere. And it requires somebody tapping them on the shoulder and saying, hey, I love your business. Would you ever sell it? And for us, this has happened via happenstance. So, you know, I wrote a book, I'm on social media, I have a broad network of people, and I bump into all sorts of different people. And so one example is 3 years ago, I was in New Zealand. I was there for a philanthropy conference, totally random. And I said, who do I know in Auckland? And I looked through my LinkedIn and I found there's this guy, Matt Buchanan. And I've been using this app called Letterboxd to track my movies. I thought it was really cool, and my brother uses it. And so I said, oh, I'll go over coffee with Matt. And we sit down and I start asking him questions about the business. And he says, you know, we started about 10 years ago, and yeah, we blew up during COVID, and now we're at like 10 million registered users. And I was like, well, like record scratch, how big is this? And he started walking me through the business. And I said, well, what's your end game? What do you want to get out of this? Do you want to sell, or do you want to keep running it? And he said, well, you know, we've always thought we would sell for the right price. And I just stopped him and said, well, what's the right price? And he said a number. And I said, okay. And that was that. And we met at the Auckland airport. Me and Zoe were in the Air New Zealand lounge eating lamb or something. And we sat there and we hashed out a letter of intent. And so I don't believe that the best deals are really just relationships. And so we've been lucky enough to have a lot of relationships and find these incredible opportunities.
I even add to that, like, I think the Serato acquisition is a perfect example of that too, in terms of a lot of buyers are not only financially oriented, right? Like they are looking for a real long-term home for their business. They want a partner that understands their long-term vision. If they want to roll a piece of equity, or they want to, you know, take a piece of tiny back, like these were all extremely important factors in determining whether Serato was going to sell to us. Like they had an offer from a private equity firm. We're not private equity. We're long-term owners of these businesses. We think differently than, you know, a traditional Vista equity, or even a strategic that might replace the entire management team or try to smash things together. And that really played a massive factor in getting, you know, Steve West and AGM to partner with us. And they, you know, we're happy to have them along for the ride for the next 10 plus years. That's the kinds of business, or those are the kinds of businesses that we're looking for.
It's gonna sound cheesy, but we call it nice as a competitive advantage, right? Like there's two elements. One is just being normal. Like I remember Chris and I would meet all these private equity guys, and they would be like, well, what's your CAGR? What's your EBITDA? All these finance terms. And honestly, we didn't know what they were talking about, because all we knew was net profit, what's in the bank, or P&L. And it just confused us. And I think being able to speak founder is a very unique thing, to be able to say, I've been in your shoes. I know what it feels like. I know the stress. I understand what your employees might want. And for us now, I know what the CEO wants, right? There's a lot of different stakeholders. It's not just the founders selling, it's also the management team and the employees and all these other kind of intrinsic details.
I'm John Kennedy, coming from Seattle. Many of your businesses, or many of the portfolio companies, rely on software development to compete. And software development is going through a fundamental change right now. Do you have a portfolio-wide strategy to move companies to AI-powered development?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm spending probably 50% of my time right now getting to the metal. So that's been using the tools and trying to learn them myself, figure out where we can apply it within the portfolio. We've been rolling that out throughout. And the other is trying to, really get to the metal with OpenAI and Anthropic and all the people leading those companies, and asking them questions about what's coming so that we are prepared. And we're being very aggressive about rolling that throughout the business. Like if there's a business we own and the developer is not using Copilot and Windsurf and Cursor, like that's a problem.
And I would say there's a ton of benefit to having a portfolio of 25 plus different types of software companies using different tools, and then sharing all that know-how and best practice. Like that's something that's very important to us. Like we're pushing hard on it. Like at our office, like the number one theme is going to be, hey, what are you getting out of this? Show everyone. And it works. Like I think the best way to get the leverage and to get people using this stuff is through show and tell. So it's great.
Hello, I'm Jonas in from Pandora today. I had a question about the word you guys use on your web and some of your writing. That's the word wonderful. People I learned. Can you talk about that word? Maybe I'm coming on it too much, but what that means qualitatively for you guys. And I appreciate the word myself, children have wonder, Serato, Errol rest. I can see it, having fun. Well, that element, wonder, show it first. So I just want to ask if you guys think about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of what we do is following our passions. So if you think about it, as a barista, we buy Aeropress. I love coffee. I love movies. We bought Letterboxd. I used to DJ, but Serato, and I think we were really looking for businesses that people feel warmly about. And if you think about what Jordan was talking about with Serato, there's 2 million DJs, some of them in their bedroom, up to like Diplo performing at Burning Man, that are obsessed with Serato. And to me, that makes me feel really good. When I talk to people and they say, I bought a distressed business for 50 cents on the dollar, and then I sold it out in bankruptcy, and I made X amount of money. Like, I can be impressed by the financial engineering, but it doesn't make me feel warm and fuzzy. Nor does it give a lot of people an amazing living and benefit the world in a broader way. So I think that's kind of how we think about wonderful. And obviously, a component of that is it has to be a wonderful business financially. And what we've found is that usually, when people are crazy about a business, the numbers take care of themselves. So usually those are the businesses we see that have very strong margin profiles and growth profiles naturally.
Hi, I'm Curtis. I live down the street. The gentleman before me was talking about AI and LLM-driven development, but it was kind of in the context of the cost side. So can we get our engineers using Copilot, make sure they use Cursor? But what about the top line of the revenue side? So if I'm thinking about it, me personally, I got a Shopify store. I have several $100 a month plus SaaS products that I've used that I decided one day I don't want to pay this anymore. I open up Cursor and Claude, and 4 hours later, I grab the Shopify API, I grab transactional email API, and I'm like, you know what? This works. I built it myself. This is amazing, and I fire my paid SaaS. How are you dealing with customers and people out in the world deciding they don't need software anymore because they can build their own?
Yeah. Sorry. I just want to say, like, I've found that there's a lot of tools I've tried to do that with, and I've coded my own solution, but I find it still requires maintenance and overhead and time. And I think what's really going to happen is there's just going to be more software in general and more competition. So I don't know if you read our letter, but we talked about over the last year or two, we've passed on many businesses that previously we would have jumped on. Software businesses growing at amazing rates with high margins and retention. And what we're looking for now is we're going to do software. We need a reason why people stick with it, right? So we need a network effect. We need a hardware lock-in, like with Serato, something like that. I think software in general is about to get way harder. You might have seen on Instagram, there's all these kids that are bragging about how they've made $50,000 a month making like a calorie app with AI. And I think that's awesome that those people are doing that, but there's going to be 1,000 copycats in 20 minutes because people like you and me whip those up ourselves. So I think software is becoming less and less investable over time.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Shane. I flew in from Texas.
Thanks for coming, Shane. Good to see you.
It's nice to see you too. I've got a two-part question. Andrew, you talked about Letterboxd, and I really like the story about how the investment came about. I was bringing it in, and you were just kind of doing something personal. Along that line, I was curious if you could tell us a little bit about how Letterboxd is growing, specifically how many monthly active users it has, how many that's grown over the past year.
So when we bought it, I think there was 10 million registered. Now we're at 20 million registered. Jordan, do you have the more precise MAU numbers and stuff?
I can't disclose the exact MAU, but I can tell you that it's growing at a clip of 60% plus a year. It's actually accelerating. Revenue is also growing at a comparable clip. the business is doing really well. We're really excited about the process of the business.
But the most fascinating thing about Letterboxd is it was these two guys in New Zealand who were just designers, and they started this social network. And before they do it, they had this incredible business. They built this network effect with no venture capital, and they still, I think, they only have what 12 or 15 employees or something, little bit, maybe more 20, something like that, and are running really, really solid profit. So it's a fascinating business. And I think that we really haven't scratched the surface. Like if you apply typical social network monetization numbers to that size and registered user base, I think we can grow a lot. It's really a matter of, it's always a delicate balance. We don't want to get in there too aggressively and try and over monetize it before we've built a landing in the block. So we're proceeding cautiously, but the revenue is growing alongside the user base.
So that's the second part of the question, even using the member number as opposed to the monthly active user number, you put Facebook's multiple on that, and find the value of the companies from something like $2.5 billion, but even if it's something like Pinterest, you know, still has this bigger than.
Shane works for Bill Ackman. He's like, let's go with that. Yes.
Those are the things we look at too, but I agree with Andrew around. There is something magical about Letterboxd around the authenticity, around, you know, this delicate balance of advertising, monetization, community, this like vintage internet appeal to it, like this ability to connect with people that are really passionate about something that you love. So it's like, you know, that magic is so important. So how do we grow this business responsibly while retaining that really magical component? And I actually believe Matt, Carl, and we, to be honest, we're working alongside them. We're doing a good job of that. So we're balancing that.
But if you think about it, you know, Letterboxd has so much data film that I think one of the things we can talk about, for example, is right now, all of the advertising is hand sold. So somebody comes in, they say, you know, A24 or whatever comes in, they say, hey, we've got this movie, we've got a budget, we'd like to buy some ads, and they will hand select an audience or whatever. I think where we could move in the future would be Tarantino's coming out with a new movie, show only to people that are in cities where the movie's showing, and they've rated Tarantino movies 4 stars plus, and we can hyper target and then even track, did they convert, did they go buy movie tickets and stuff. That's not where we're at right now, but I think that's kind of the vision for the future where if we go, we just are so sensitive to not upsetting the community and not messing with it. So be very forward.
So just the last thing I'll say is that you want to caveat that multiple is illustrative. I don't think that Facebook is exactly a
Sure.
company. Take other, you know, internet companies that have active users and devices.
Yes.
Number that's significant.
It's a valuable business, and we felt very lucky that we were able to make the investment when we did, and we've been blown away. I mean, even at the Emmys and stuff, people are bringing up Letterboxd. It's pretty wild.
So where I was going with that is, from the tiny limited investor standpoint, when can we expect to see more disclosure on these great businesses that you have that are kind of hidden under the surface?
So we're walking a line where it's a subsidiary with the we're like we're an investor, we're an LP, and then we own 50% of the GP directly. I own the other 50% of the GP, and I've been giving all the distributions tonight. So it's a bit of a nuanced thing. Mike, do you want to just speak to a little bit of the work we've been doing with the auditors and accounting to what we can disclose?
Yeah, I think,
Oh, you gotta go closer to the screen.
sorry, Q1 was a good example, right? We did provide a bit more information on a consolidated basis for fund companies. You know, both the revenue level and other distributions, right? So we're going to try and work every quarter to provide a bit more information. You know, there is an audit piece of this that as a public company we have to be mindful of, right? We are working very closely with our auditors and legal counsel to ensure that, you know, every quarter we try to enhance the disclosure, right? And whether that can get down to a company level, I think working through some of those questions internally. Definitely you'll see that, you know, with the example of the first quarter of the year, right? We're on the path now to try and disclose more. And that's part of the objectives.
And also, anyone that is a director, I know there's some people that are shareholders in the public company as well as in the fund. I believe you guys are. You guys obviously we can disclose all that, but if you just send me an email, we can get you all.
We want everyone to know. We get it.
Yeah, it's we would love to share it all. It's just there's accounting and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Thank you. But how's it going? Good.
So I just want to start out by saying thank you. I've been here for 3 years now.
Wait, closer to the mic.
Oh, it's closer to the mic. There we go. Okay, working. It wasn't high enough, I guess. So I just want to thank you. I've been here for 3 years now, and that formative is the tiny. And if it weren't for the environment that I think Chris gave their analysts, I don't know if I could that I have today be that. So I'm very grateful to you both. So for someone who is running a business now and self-sustaining, it's bootstrapped, it's profitable, but also has the problem of being kind of a tumbleweed. When I speak, as you know, I'm classically awkward and just kind of like tumbling through the wind, and then I say something weird. As someone who speaks so eloquently, what advice would you have for someone who doesn't speak?
I remember I often will meet people that are like 22 and they're starting a business. And they come to me and they say, well, I've got this business and this business and this business. I'm doing this and I also am doing this. And I go, oh my God. And I remember being at that stage. And I realized that people want simplicity and they want stories. So if you tell someone what you do, that's very different than storytelling. And so one of the things you might notice, Chris and I spent a lot of time figuring out how do we answer questions with stories. So I could have said, when I got that question about Letterboxd or an acquisition or how we source, I could say, we have a proprietary deal sourcing strategy of meeting people and making offers on demand. Instead, I told a story about meeting Matt, and it's just more accessible and memorable. And I said one thing, not 20 different things. So as someone who's spastic with ADHD, I also suffer from this, and I've had to learn just to tell one story as an answer.
I highly recommend the book Story Review by Matthew Dix, specifically when it comes to how to craft a narrative like that. I think everyone here would benefit.
Thank you so much.
Hi, my question is around transitioning from the co-CEO's role to chairman, vice chairman, and then bringing Jordan as CEO. So it's more like in the angle of the philosophy of when did you kind of like decide that you are doing the best job you could be doing and decide to step down or move aside. And you've talked about doing this plenty times along your career among companies, among the faces of the company. So how do you think about those, like transitions and when to?
Yeah, I think for me personally, I like running businesses that are about 15 people to 20 people, and that's where I tap out. I think that's where I'm really good. And I think for the first 7 or 8 years of Tiny, we had a very small head office, and we had a handful of CEOs or managing it, so that worked out pretty well. And I found that when we got to the point of where we were, we owned 30 businesses, and we had 15, 20 people in the head office, I just realized I'm not in my zone of genius, and I'm getting dragged into all these things that I don't enjoy, and I'm not very good at. I recently heard someone said, if you're not waking up every morning excited to get to work, that's a signal that something is wrong. And I think I felt that for 6 months to a year. And Chris and I had a lot of long conversations about that. And we realized it made a lot of sense for us to focus where we were really good and have someone focus where we were weak. And so it's actually worked out incredible for us. And we're super happy with it. Chris, do we need to add to that?
I think you said it well. I think it's one of our unfair advantages, is the ability to actually get out of the way. And I meet with a lot of founders who are very eager to try and elevate someone up to take the reins, so they just end up swooping and moving. And I really do think that we're not as quite aware just how much of a superpower that tends to be. It's hard.
We always said
this one, especially, I think was really hard, was actually transitioning out. Because it's very big.
We've always said we're Teflon for tasks. Right? So I think that's a great heuristic as a entrepreneur, is to try and be Teflon for tasks, where the only tasks that you do are the things you're truly great at. And I feel like over the last year, Chris and I have been able to focus where we're really strong, which is connecting with founders, telling the story, and allocating capital.
not day-to-day operations.
Yeah, I actually feel far more thoughtful now than we ever were before. We're getting into all these other things. Thank you.
My name is Wally. My question is, you come across a great business, how do you decide which pool of capital to use? And what is your, how do you make the optimal long-term makeup revenue to interact with either the tiny holdco or the active fund? What is that?
Yeah, for clarity, so we raised about, I think it's roughly 222 million Canadian back in 2021. That was our first fund as a corporate public, and we fully deployed that in 2024, I believe. Is that correct? So that's fully deployed, and we don't have any expectation that we'll raise another fund. And so going forward, everything sits in the public company, which bucket it goes within, which operating group is often a question, but everything's going to be in the public company.
Hey there, Brian, Victoria here. My first tiny AGM, and given how human focused I've heard you talk, I am really curious about your AI strategy and like philosophy at the core. When you're a publicly traded company, you have to make revenue, bottom line, but I've heard you really lean into like the human elements of the business, the unfair advantages, which I really appreciate. And so curious about your AI philosophy and strategy. Like how are you balancing those innovation, revenue, and human displacement?
I think a lot of people make the mistake where they hear, like, there's a story of, there's a Swedish company, fintech company called Klarna. And Klarna did a partnership with OpenAI. And they said, we have now automated our support team, right? And so people think, oh my God, they're just going to have no support people and their margins are going to go up. And what typically happens in a business is that they do a lot more work. So if you think about Excel, Excel came out or spreadsheets came out in the 80s, and everybody said, this is the end of bookkeeping, this is the end of accounting, what are all the accountants going to do? Well, as we all know, the accountants found things to do. They're still very busy and there's a lot of them. So I think it's really just pivoting what people focus their energies on ultimately. And I think we are forced to compete. If you don't embrace these technologies, you're just going to operate at far lower margins than anyone else. And we have to add these sustaining innovations.
I think I'll just real quick is that you never want to mistake a clear view for a short distance. And this is one of those things where we all see it coming, and we're all very aware, but trying to time that can make you a fool pretty quickly. So we're being pretty cautious. We're very aware.
And even as just a tiny case study example, it's specific to support, like Clean Canvas, one of our theme businesses was one of our first to adopt like an AI first approach to support. And it was all in the service of enhancing those customer support representatives and actually upskilling them so they became success people or sales people, actually revenue generating, tasks and what that is. And I think it's almost the wrong question. Like, I think if there's a support person that's saying, oh, is this going to replace my job? That's the wrong question. Like, you should be asking, well, why don't we learn this and automate this part of my job and start upskilling and actually doing, all these other things and enhancing margin? What are you doing? So it really is about enhancement.
I couldn't agree more. So thank you for that.
Thank you for sharing, very inspiring. My name is Gregory and I'm from Armenia, very small local country with like 3 million people. So I'm wondering how for small countries with more like local focus of like entrepreneurship and like how ideas and how like the society works more to the global market where it's like larger, more connected. You mentioned like New Zealand, US is nearby, like all this more larger global thinking in terms of like people and how like the society works and like what advice do you have in terms of like escaping this like local mindset, more like global mindset of taking risks and maybe trying to start something?
Funny you asked that. I was meeting with another shareholder talking about this, and where we landed on this was
you are the sum of your 5 best friends. So I think you need to find those people that are doing the things you want to do, that are entrepreneurial. And what I've been surprised by is even in Victoria, BC, where we're a sleepy government town, there's not a huge tech scene, there's a lot of really interesting entrepreneurs out there. And we've just collected them. We find them over time and we get to know them and they become our friends. And I think there's a real advantage to being outside of a bubble like Silicon Valley. You know, if you talk to someone in New York, they'll say to you, you know, I went to this school and then I worked at KKR, right? That's status. If you're in Silicon Valley, they'll say, I was at this cool unicorn company and we raised from Sequoia, right? And so the nice thing about being in Armenia or Victoria is you probably don't have all that mimetic signaling about what you should do. And I think you get freedom of thought. And in terms of accessing global markets, other than raising capital, which sometimes being in a big city you benefit from, I think you can access global markets from anywhere on the internet. I mean, we're a testament to that. It's not like Chris and I spent all of our time wheeling and dealing and closing deals down in the States. We built a whole business from here.
Mike Leslie, CEO for you. You mentioned your philosophy of, you know, being very hands-off, like founders sort of like run their own well, should be really operations and stuff, hiring and everything. But you also have some pretty strong opinions on like, you know, leveraging things like AI, using tools internally. How you balance that, like, you know, desire to like have the influence, I assume, on the companies, making sure that they are being competitive in the market and they're taking that stuff seriously, but then also respecting that kind of like philosophy of your space and being autonomous.
So we've learned this lesson a million times, but when we hire a CEO, what we used to do, we would be talking to CEO candidates, and they would say something like, I think the way to grow this business that you might put me in charge of is via enterprise sales or marketing or whatever it is. And we would say, well, wow, we really like this person, but we actually think the strategy should be D2C e-commerce or something else. And we've learned that when we hire someone, they do what they say they're going to do. You can't convince them. You know, to use the elephant analogy I've used before, to a man with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. A man or woman with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And these CEOs are going to go where they're going to go. So we focus on choosing CEOs who we are aligned with. I remember Chris and I were in New York, and we met with Gerard. And we said, Gerard, what would you do if we gave you the keys to Aeropress? And, you know, he talked for 20 minutes about all the things he would do. And at the end of it, we looked at each other and we said, yeah, that sounds pretty good. And he's done what he said he's going to do. And in other situations where we've had someone, you know, deliver a pitch and we haven't quite been aligned, and it almost always ends up that way, for better or worse. So now we just try and ensure we're aligned with the strategy.
Is that ever a barrier to bring on new companies when the CEOs of the state?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's
During the diligence process, during our management meetings and things like that, like, I think what's important is setting expectations. Being like, I never want management to be surprised, you know, after, you know, post acquisition day one, it's like, oh, hey, we want you to do this. Like, that's a mistake, right? Like, we're talking about what the plan is, what the expectations are, what our vision for the company is versus what yours is. And, you know, I mean, Serato is a great example of that. We spent so much time talking to management about their vision and our vision, and agreeing and saying all the same things that, like, hey, next week when I go spend the week with the management team, like, it's just talking about all the things that we talked about for the last 6 months. Let's go and do them. So setting expectations, being clear, being transparent is so important before the team.
Thanks.
Hey, I'm Colin. I'm from here and looking for a good story potentially with what's one thing you have for Tiny that you always wanted to do but you haven't done yet?
you mean like a business we wish we could acquire it or something?
Whatever it might be. Yeah, what gets you most excited? The mission you haven't accomplished yet.
You know, I actually don't know. We're not big on planning 10 years out and having some crazy vision. Like, I know a guy, remember I was talking to this guy 10 years ago, and I said, what's your end game? And he said, my end game is still on the New York Jets, right? I would say Chris and I have that. And I think if you'd asked us what our end game was 10 years ago, we would have said, we want to be doing $5 million of profit. And that would be an amazing win. So we don't really think that way. Are there businesses that we admire? Absolutely. That if they dropped in our lap, we would be very excited about. I don't want to say any of them publicly because we have a list of kind of companies we really admire that we're always in touch with the leaders of. But no, I wouldn't say there's any big looming kind of goal or thing like that.
I'd say it's more anti-goals. I feel like we could talk and honestly with things that I don't want my life to look like, or things I'd rather avoid. And we've been doing often like an annual exercise of just writing those out, and that's much more of a guiding principle for us than shining North Star.
At one point, I was just being here for a year. I've seen this in action with this recent Survivor deal. The guys wanted to get behind something and support it and say, hey, this is really important for us to grow and develop our company. They put the money where their mouth is behind their words. So I think we just saw this play out, and I think it's going to be able to keep playing out because they're committed to doing that. So a little piece of anecdotal information from the new guy. I'm excited that you're talking about the New York Jets. So.
I mean, maybe we'll buy the New York Jets. I don't know. It was good business. I don't know.
Thanks, guys. I like hearing about the adventures.
Oh, thank you.
We've really been appreciating this, what you guys are demonstrating with the commitment to confidence, discipline, and also community and culture, supporting leaders. And I guess my question is, like, what do you see as this example that you're setting, like how you're doing this just a little bit different than typical market patterns? You know, what is the potential of the example that you're setting, how you operate, and also how do you think about how these patterns of developing firms could apply in both?
I think if there's one thing that is unique about our story, it's that we're not confident. Like we're not people that came from some crazy pedigree and went to a great school.
We're animal bumpkins.
Yeah.
Truly. I think we can do this. Anyone can.
Yeah. I think like just the idea of like I always whenever I talk to young entrepreneurs, I always say like start where you want to end up, right? So often you'll hear people and I'll say, well, first I'm going to go into investment banking and then I'll go work at Deloitte and then when I'm about 32 I'll raise my first private equity fund because I really want to buy businesses. And I'm always like, look, you're 22. Like now is the perfect time to go buy a business. Just start where you want to end up. And I think we've just really focused on that. So my hope is that more people see an unconventional path, and that finance doesn't have to be this thing in a suit that you have to work 16-hour days in New York and hate your life. So, I mean, Chris, any thoughts?
No, well, honestly, I have to say that just a moment ago, which is, what I hope the impression is left on others, and it really is that if we can do this, anyone can, and we're really not that special. We are just trying to sit in our hands and make awful decisions. I appreciate the question.
And how do you kind of balance this contrast between finding opportunities kind of all over the world and also connecting with entrepreneurs here in Victoria?
Well, I mean, there's lots of our friends here who are entrepreneurs. And look through this whole group, and there's tons. Mostly it's just friends and having things in common. Like we don't love to do too much business locally because it's great to just be friends with everybody. Although we do have some local businesses.
Well, sometimes we scratch an itch, like truly with AeroPress. The guy was making AeroPress and said, who owns this? And we looked up thinking it would be some private equity group. Found out it was the founder himself who still owned it. Like often we're just scratching our own itches and trying to like investigate.
Thanks.
Hi, my name's Matt. I'm local here in Victoria, and thanks for this posting on your story. So I found out now how funny you are. Anyways, so mine's more of a personal question. So I'm stepping into a business that's thrived, a local business that's thrived the past 30, 40 years. I'm working internationally, basically just off word of mouth and referral. And as someone stepping into business who's not necessarily trying to build a business in terms of clients, how would you recommend someone like me develop the brand, what are like 3 strategies that you could recommend for a guy like me to increase brand recognition?
Are you saying the brand right now is not well known or this well?
It's not, no, it's not, just because it's been a company that's just good word of mouth in the world.
I mean, I really like the rule of 5. So it's like if someone sees your company name 5 times, they think you're everywhere. And so I don't know what line of business you're in, but I think that if you can figure out a way for people to just have you in their brain, right? So an example of that, do you guys remember there was that all those podcasts about maybe 10 years ago, and they would say brought to you by MailChimp? Anyone remember that? Yeah, like everywhere. And when I went to go do email marketing, without even thinking about it, I just typed in MailChimp because it's a weird name, very memorable, and I just heard it everywhere. And so you see there's some local businesses that do this, like Tedford Garage Doors. They have a teddy bear as their mascot, and you see it on every bus. And so if my garage door breaks, I just think I'm going to call Tedford. So I would think about that rule of 5. Chris?
No, I totally agree, actually. Yeah. Great, perfect. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Glenn. I'm a third year going into fourth year at UBIG. And this question might not be as fancy as everyone else, but I know China invests in awesome businesses. And so I was wondering if you guys have ever considered like investing in like individuals with like high potential.
So I'd say we do that usually in terms of leadership, right? So we'll take a chance on putting someone in that shows a lot of gumption. And there's a lot of examples actually of people that have rose up through the ranks where, I mean, I've told the story of Ben before, right? Ben was like, I'm a writer, what can I do? And then he rose through the ranks to become CEO and do all these other things. So I think Kimmy, I mean, there's a guy in Kimmy who's amazing, and he came to us and he said, look, all these companies that you own, they're spending too much money on software. No one's negotiating any of that. Chris and I, when we were running business day to day, we would negotiate everything. Like I'm talking like the IKEA desk, the coffee beans in the office, everything. And as we got bigger, we realized that was a function that was lost because ultimately employees just don't care as much as you. And so we built this business with Kimia, and he ended up selling that business and going off to work at Ramp. And then we actually did the same thing with another guy. We built a business called TechSource, and now that's basically our procurement internally, but it's a business that works with other people and is profitable. So we love taking chances on people, but most of the time it's via a need or a business we're in.
Awesome, thank you.
Hello, my name is Ryan from Vancouver. This is my 3rd year of attendance, so thank you for putting it on. I don't know if it was, I believe it was you that made a comment that Gordon builds boats, and I was curious if you've ever looked at kind of great baby boomer kind of led legacy type companies that are maybe attached to asphalt, waste management, construction. Just the reason being is that most of the businesses that you guys look at are very kind of tech based, except for the last year's attempted milestone acquisition. Now, do you ever come across like great kind of like concrete rebar type, those types of companies? The reason being is that a lot of these companies are run by older gentlemen that are looking for an exit, and young people don't want to do this. It's not sexy, and this touches my wheels because that's all I understand. I don't understand half the businesses that you guys are in. I'm not a tenant. You know what I mean? You want to build a building? Okay, now let's have a conversation.
So when Chris and I started at Tiny, when we pivoted from starting businesses to investing, we were really looking at Warren Buffett as an example and going, we should really buy more old school businesses. There's probably all these opportunities to grow them with modern marketing and process and stuff. And I remember we met this guy, he'd been running his business for 50 years or something, with this huge walrus mustache, he had a flip phone, and finally we got a meeting with him, and we're in the basement of his office, and he just sits down like this. Who the fuck are you?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
and
Redneck billionaires. Redneck.
now, he's an amazing guy. He's actually really nice, but he ran all these industrial businesses. And as we were talking about what we did, we just realized that we didn't speak his language.
we didn't have any ability to say, look, we understand all your businesses, we take great care of them. For us, or for him, we're a gamble to do a deal. The other problem is so many of these industrial businesses, like, let's say like a gravel business or porta potty rental or fence rental business, people don't choose them because they're the best. They choose them because they show up in their commodity and they ultimately negotiate the price. So for us, we've looked at hundreds of traditional businesses and we really only invested in AeroPress, which is the coffee maker business. That's when we could understand it made a lot of sense to us where we could add value. But, and we felt that had a brand vote. But most of these businesses, they just don't have a brand. So we've struggled to invest in that space and never say never. We would love to buy more traditional businesses. That just hasn't been where our unfair advantage is.
Yeah, and even just touching on it, Buffettism, like it's just, maybe one day we'll be in our circle of competence. We look at them, we consider them, we learn. Like today, this is what we're good at, so we're focusing on that.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to follow up on that, last one, I wasn't going to ask the question, but I heard that. So last year, I asked a very similar question, if you had interest in buying non-tech type businesses, especially like I mentioned a specific one that was a very traditional.
You might tell someone that
A very traditional type business, but there was additional technology that could transform the thing, like tremendous unfair advantages. And at the AGM last year, I got a very favorable reaction from you guys. But then after a brief conversation with you after the meeting, I signed up as a venture capital scout, and then I was, in contact with Pedro and told him to put everything through Canada Austin. But when I brought that same deal to Pedro, he said, we don't really invest in that kind of thing. We're really just looking for tech companies' websites that make money. So should I be looking for those kind of businesses for you guys or not? And if so, is there some sort of problem with something about the way that venture capital scouts normally do? Because it was totally blocked.
I mean, I would say this is sometimes the tragedy of having an organization where there's a lot of different people someone can talk to. And sometimes, a great deal comes to us and someone doesn't understand it or discards it. And that's happened with me. Like I've discarded many deals and then someone from Austin's team is like, oh my God, this is actually a gold mine. This is amazing that we did the deal. I can't speak to that exact deal. I don't remember it. But you should talk to Austin.
Yeah, corner is right.
And find out let's find out what happened with that deal and we'll root it out. Okay, yeah, and I appreciate you mentioning that. Thank you.
Hi, it's Josh from Squamish. Would love to know from each of you at the table, what is the segment you're most excited about going forward? So you haven't talked about deal flow, lots of great questions recently about different types of businesses. What types of businesses in the pipeline get you most excited?
I'll take this one before you steal it from me. I have a bit of recency bias, and because I'm going to New Zealand next week and we just made this acquisition and it's fresh, I'm really excited about Toronto. I'm really excited about the long-term prospects. I'm excited about the potential for tuck-ins and organic growth investments. So, of course, I love all my businesses equally, but that one is exciting.
It's hard to choose a child, but honestly, I think that Toronto is such an important acquisition for us. The definition's hard, but I think without a doubt it's good to find timing for a decade to come. Without a doubt, I think it's probably the most important thing we've done. And in terms of the pipeline of what's in there, I'm not going to waste too much on which verticals we're most excited by. So,
Yeah, you're at a family dinner asking us who's your favorite child.
It's right there.
Honestly, I love all my children equally. So
To clarify, wasn't it which of the businesses that you own you're most excited about? It's more sort of the future verticals.
Yeah, I understand.
Oh, I see.
That's what I'm saying. Like, I
And I'm not looking to figure out what you're looking to buy. It's more so just are there segments, based,
I love coffee. Like I really love coffee. I think it's highly addictive, but good for you. Very good for you. There's lots of studies that back this up. And people will be drinking in 50 years. And I think that it's a very interesting vertical. And we've obviously got a taste of the therapists, but I think that's a space that I always have my eye on.
there's sort of a version of my mind of
it's less of what we're most excited about right now and more of what's changed our thinking when we look at the pipeline. And so much of it is, a lot of AI questions are coming up. So much is, does this have the same staying happen in the future given recent AI? And I see that will make things change in how we view the pipeline and what we're seeing them to.
I don't think. But I was gonna say, like, I think, we publicly stated we're looking at the technology, focus on the current revenue software, stuff like that, but I think Andrew also said it really well around, like, we have a really maybe more disciplined approach on that, like, in having with the lens of AI and risk, and like, what will exist in 10 years, and what are the times around data and maintenance and moat or future proof. So like, I think it's just evolving that preference over time. It hasn't really changed.
Like the way I always put it is that we're building or buying sandcastles on the beach. And the tide used to be predictable in technology, and now the tide has changed. And so we're having to be a lot more thoughtful. We're having to be a lot more conservative in our underwriting of where the placement of our different sandcastles and what we're buying. So it's really interesting right now.
We're quoting the annual letter here. By the way.
Maybe let's do two more questions.
Yes.
Great.
So it's about your philosophy on stock-based compensation. So I think you've said before that you aren't particularly enthusiastic about just giving out stock, but also aligning with the most important metric they have on their business. And I think you've recently opened up to the idea of more stock-based compensation. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I see a little bit more in that respect. And I wanted to ask you your philosophy in that, specifically, like how you structure that incentive, how you think about those things, and also about from the insurance outstanding dilution perspective, and also financing acquisitions through more Asian shares, something like that.
Well, I would say that shares are our most precious asset, and we don't like giving out lottery tickets, certainly to employees. So we think really thoughtfully about, very thoughtful about how we incentivize people. And I'd say it's one of the many tools in the toolkit, and every CEO and every leader is different. And so how we think about incentivizing the staff at the head office would be different than how we might incentivize a platform leader versus CEO at an individual business. So it's one of many things that we look at. I would say we're not rushing to issue equity, that's for sure, for any acquisitions. And we're not looking to roll out a massive stock option package or anything like that. Jordan, though, has been thinking a lot about how to get all the CEOs aligned. So Jordan, do you want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, we are in the middle of finding a long-term incentive plan. I think, where we've landed is tying, compensation and incentives to long-term growth and the intrinsic value of that particular business, like what you have a sphere of control over, right? And what we think is really important at time is growing revenue and cash flow responsibly over time, right? So we're free from the market. We're going to set some benchmarks. We're going to set evaluation criteria. And if someone hits a home run, they should be compensated on that. And that's win-win for us, shareholders, for them, and it's aligned. So that's what we're headed to.
Any final question?
My name is Carrie McClay. I'm a local Victoria business owner. I own a social enterprise, very successful, fortunately. I also work as the director of fund development and community engagement for the Victoria Native Venture Center. I am Indigenous. I just want to say thank you so much for your commitment, your responsibility to people in need through your foundation. I want to thank you for your generosity in assisting people who are struggling with homelessness, mental health issues, and also security. I really admire what you're doing, and thank you very much.
Thank you. That's very kind. Thank you. Well, guys, I really appreciate you listening to us drone on about all sorts of things, and
we'll try to cut down on the legal readings next time, but it's kind of it's one of the things we gotta do. Thank you so much for coming, and especially some of the people who came like 10 to 15 hours, that's amazing. We're so lucky to have you guys all here, so thank you very much.
I know, I was like, you know, Sorry. I send it.